Welcome to the first video on sampling distributions. This topic is actually a turning point in our class. So far, we've been mostly talking about values that are calculated to summarize data sets that have been collected from samples. We talked about how values such as the mean, median, or standard deviation can be calculated to get an overall picture of what the data looks like. However, we haven't gone into much detail about how a person uses the data from his or her sample to reach a conclusion about the entire population that the sample came from. At this point, we'll move away from discussing how to summarize a set of data, and we'll begin to cover the details of how a conclusion about an entire population is reached based on data from a sample. I think that people usually find this to be the most interesting part of statistics, because it's when we start to talk about how researchers answer questions about the world in which we live. Although the process of reaching a conclusion about an entire population based on data from a sample seems like it should be simple and straightforward, it actually isn't as straightforward as it seems. There are two major issues that people face when they use data from samples to reach conclusions about populations. The first issue is that a sample almost never provides perfectly accurate information about the entire population. For example, if 48% of the people in a sample say that they plan to vote for a certain candidate, that doesn't necessarily mean that exactly 48% of the population plans to vote for that candidate. The second issue is the fact that different samples will give different results. If a study is carried out with one sample, and then the study is repeated with a different sample, the results of the two studies will almost always be at least somewhat different. If you think about it, this makes perfect sense. After all, each sample is a different mixture of people. Now, these two issues might make it seem like it's not possible to reach a conclusion about a population based on data from a sample. These two issues might make it seem like collecting data from a sample is useless, because there's no guarantee that the results will be accurate. However, using data from a sample to reach a conclusion about a population isn't as useless as it seems. Although you can't prove something about a population with data from a sample, you can reach an inference about the population with a high level of confidence. That's because when research is done properly, the inferences that are reached about populations are correct more often than they're incorrect. In order to truly understand how it's possible to use data from a sample to reach an inference about an entire population, you need to have a good understanding of statistical theory. The goal of this lecture is to cover the theory that you need to understand before you can grasp the process of using data from a sample to reach an inference about an entire population. In later videos, we'll actually go through step-by-step examples of using data from samples to reach inferences about populations. However, in this video, we will just cover the theory that underlies the process of reaching an inference about a population with data from a sample.